So I had the pleasure of seeing the upcoming Path of Exile expansion called The Awakening, and I've got to say, I'm now really looking forward to getting back into Path of Exile. The biggest part of the expansion is that it's adding Act 4, so it's the first expansion that's been storyline focused, and so the guys at Grinding Gears led me through some of the Act 4 content. And what's really interesting to me about most of it is that they've tried to really ramp up the creepy factor. Rayclass, the world that Path of Exile takes place in, has always been a little creepy, but in this case, they've really amped that up, and they actually told me that their designers had gone through like a lot of different images that creep people out, things that you normally aren't supposed to put in games, and they wanted to put them in specifically because they make people feel uncomfortable. So in one place, for example, you enter mines, and within the mines you see monsters that are just pockmarked with little holes going through them, and it looks really creepy and strange. And one of these creatures, as it turns out, was actually sort of it was sort of like seeing the human centipede of zombies crawling across the screen. It was really freaky and bizarre, and that's one part to look forward to. And I think one thing they're really trying to do is put in a lot of different variety of creatures that we haven't seen before. You should expect to see a lot more new enemies than you've seen in the previous acts. As much as the Act 4 seems really interesting to me, I think what's even more fascinating is what they're doing to the passive skill tree. And of course, Path of Exile has this amazing skill tree. However, they're adding something even new to the passive skill tree. Jewels that can be socketed into the tree. There are going to be places where there's no skill, and you can unlock that, and then you can move a jewel into that, sort of in the same way that you use skill gems on your weapons. I've never seen anything quite like this. Some of the jewels that you put into the skill tree actually have a radius that shows around them, and whatever that jewel does, it affects all of the skills on the tree within that radius. For example, if you're working on the axe side of the tree, unlocking things that improve your skill with axes, you might slot a jewel into there that changes all of those things so that they affect bows. And this kind of thing can drastically change how you play, especially when you throw in some of the new unique weapons. So for example, you might get a bow that brings into being some skeletons when you kill the enemies that you're fighting. However, if you're an archer, most of the things relating to minions are elsewhere in the tree, over by where the witch stuff is. And so what you can do is you can use some of these jewels that you slot into the skill tree to sort of change how things work. It's pretty amazing. I've never seen anything quite like it in a game. And of course, one of my first questions was, could this potentially break Path of Exile? And the answer is possibly. It's also why the developer supports the way its community approaches the game. With such a big tree, what they've always done is they've always supported the idea of people going in there, trying to find ways of essentially breaking the skill tree and come up with uses that they didn't imagine. So they're sure that there are things that they haven't accounted for, and they're actually really looking forward to seeing what the community finds. It's sort of a metagame that the community involves itself in, like who can find cool ways of breaking Path of Exile. Another thing that I like that's being added, especially because I played as a minion build where I had like over a dozen things following me around, is that they're adding golems. And golems is essentially a pet that you can summon that can really help you out in your playstyle. And I saw two of them. I saw an ice golem, so it looks really cool in action. It's very agile. But I also saw one that was made of fire, and that's a guy that stays back. He launches artillery, and if something gets too close, he's got like flames to spew out and stuff like that. And again, all of that stuff, the golem supports all of these other changes. So a lot of things that you don't expect will happen might actually affect your golem in action as well, depending on what jewel you slot in. There are other things coming too. There's a complete rebalance. I don't know exactly all of the things that entails because that gets into the really nitty-gritty, but it's important to note that they're really looking at every single thing on that passive tree and how everything balances with everything else, and they're just completely retooling it. there's a lot to look forward to. Obviously, there's the new act, which I'm really looking forward to just because of how creepy the creatures looked. But even more so, I'm really interested in getting my hands on that new passive skill tree, getting some jewels in there, and seeing how I can break the game. How can I make the most powerful character I can? Or in contrast, how can I just make the most interesting character I can and make myself different from everybody else? And that's the thing they continue to do with Path of Exile, and in particular with The Awakening. It's just how many different ways can we make players happy? And one of the best ways to do that is make you really unique. So instead of going out there finding the best builds you can by following some kind of tutorial on the internet, you go out there and you do it yourself. You find out what you can make, exercise your creativity, and chances are you're going to get something pretty cool.